enormous history of this area. It goes back tens of thousands of years, and most of that is still to be uncovered. But far more accessible at the moment is the more modern European history, and that's what we're going to have a look at today. Just 6 weeks after Governor Phillip arrived in Port Jackson, he was up here looking for arable land to grow produce and to run cattle to feed these new arrivals. But it wasn't until the following year, 1789, that he actually found this, the Hawkesbury River, and his arable land. And then all that manna from the heavenly Hawkesbury had to be transported back to Sydney. And how did they do it? Well, by boat, of course. That was until 1889, when that railway bridge and the tunnel that links through to Woy Woy were constructed. Now, this was part of a major engineering works that was going on, a 2,600 kilometre long rail system linking the capital cities, Adelaide, Melbourne, Sydney, Brisbane, all these cities on the eastern coast. It actually put Australia together. While the bridge work and tunnelling was going on, Tom Davis's ship, General Gordon, was used to fill the gap. For a number of years, this was the ship that linked the nation. Now, what we're going to do today, we're going to visit a friend of mine who lives further down this river in another part of Broken Bay, who's going to tell us all about how, over 125 years, more than 500 sailing and steam vessels were built to service this coast. So we're off to Brisbane waters. No, it's not in Queensland. But like Brisbane and a crater on the moon, it's named after Major General Sir Thomas MacDougall Brisbane, who was a governor here and also an astronomer. Peter.
Chris, how are you?
Good.
Good to see you.
And you too. Yeah. This is Peter Ray. Now, he's a historian, photographer, artist model. No, that's artist, model maker, a man who can tell a story. So, 500 ships built here, Peter.
Yes, Chris. Yeah, this waterfront that we can see here in front of us, this was one of the major areas for building those ships.
And this, look at this.
Yeah. So this is the beginning of the Shipbuilders Memorial Walk,
right.
Pathway,
right.
Which goes 3.3 kilometres from here down to the Davistown waterfront, and we have plinths along the way, which denote where the shipyards were and talk about the history of the various shipbuilders.
Oh, so fantastic. Yeah. And this is the size of the vessels that they were building.
This is reminiscent of that, of those ships.
Wow.
So just across here is the mouth of Kincumber Creek.
Yep.
There was a significant shipyard up there that was run by a gentleman by the name of George Frost. So I thought we might start there and have a look at the George Frost shipyard. So Chris, just up here is the plinth. This is where George Frost established his shipyard. He was born in Sydney in 1834 and moved up here in 1861, marrying a local girl.
And there's the river through there.
And the Kincumber Creek is straight through there.
Ah.
Yeah, that's right.
Yep.
So, this is where, and the boats were launched sideways. Of course, the creek is quite narrow.
Yes,
so the boats were built sideways to the creek and launched that way.
What about out here? Was this the yard?
Yeah, this was all part of the yard.
Well, it's obviously a cricket ground now, isn't it?
It is, yeah, that's right, yeah.
What about Frosty? Did he have a cricket team?
He did have a cricket team.
He did?
Yep.
You're kidding?
He and Lizzie Frost had something like 20 children. 10 of those,
nearly 2 teams.
10 of those were boys.
Oh, right.
So the sons and with the old man, they met up in the 11.
Yep.
And Lizzie used to make the morning teas, make the teas on the days.
Oh, how good is that? In 1884, George built his first ship, a ketch named Lizzie Frost. And over the next 22 years, George Frost would build 19 ships, including in 1895 the ketch Defender. She was employed on the Trans-Tasman trade runs. Eventually, The vessel, in poor repair, was abandoned in the mud of the Derwent River. A few months later, in July, the shipyard's foreman, Tom Riley, died. And a few months after that, in September, George Frost himself died, aged 64. Lizzie died in 1937, at the age of 93.
So what we're going to see down here is all the shipyards of the various shipbuilders. These are the project partners that were involved in the...
It's good to see the range of support, isn't it? Oh, look at this. Doesn't this look wonderful? Along the way, the plinths are being installed to mark the people and places of historical importance. Jonathan Piper established one of the first shipyards on Brisbane water, here at Yatalunga.
Chris, here we are at Jonathan Piper's shipyard. This was one of the very first shipyards on the Brisbane water.
It says here, father of the Brisbane water shipbuilding industry.
Indeed he was, yeah. He trained so many of the other shipwrights that would have come along.
The Pipers' influence on the region's waters and use of the land cannot be overstated. They were early full-time residents, not absent landlords as many landlords were. Also significant was the large number of ships built over a 24-year period, averaging one a year. During this time, Piper taught the shipbuilding trade to many of the area's young men, including the four Davis brothers, who we'll talk of later. Jonathan Piper died on the 18th of April 1879, aged 69. Anne Piper had 14 children and died in Sydney in 1901, aged 83. An unfinished ketch was on the stocks at the time of Piper's death, so his son, William Brisbane Piper, then a shipbuilder at Cape Hawke, New South Wales, returned to oversee its completion. This final vessel from this yard was launched in October 1879, and it seems very fitting that it was named the Jonathan. So the first ship's built here then?
No, actually it wasn't. This was one of the early shipyards, but the first actual ship was the Sarah, built by Robert Henderson, which is a little bit further that way, over the ridge and a little bit towards the west.
Oh, okay.
We might head there now.
Brisbane water shipbuilding commenced in the late 1820s at Veteran Hall, Saratoga, when Sarah was built by Robert Henderson, who was also responsible for a further small number of ships built on or near the same site. Henderson was the second settler on Brisbane water, the first being James Webb, whose land was on the eastern shore at the foot of Blackwell Mountain.
This is Veteran Hall Wharf.
Yep.
Named after Veteran Hall, which is Robert Henderson's house, which was right on the waterfront here. Robert Henderson built the very first boat, a cutter called Sarah, here. And,
so this is where the yard itself would be?
This would have been the yard here, probably in the deepest part, which is probably about where we are.
And they could launch bow first here rather than putting them in sort of broadside like up at the creek there.
Yep. And before the road was cut into the hill, no doubt there was a fairly steep hill here as well, which would give the slipway a good degree to make sure the boat actually got into the water.
The Sydney Gazette recorded Sarah's Sydney arrival, describing it as a pretty built craft of 14 tons. Therefore, Sarah, we know, would have been about 10 metres long. The rugged Australian coast has claimed many ships, with the fate of Henderson's first two Brisbane water ships being unknown. However, on the 13th of December 1831, the cutter Rambler was on a voyage to Sydney with sundries such as flour and beef. She was hit by a sudden squall and capsized, taking the master and two crew with it.
Chris, here we are on the channel into the Kincumber Broadwater, the Catholic complex, which is on the other side of the channel here, where St Mary MacKillop established her boys' home, and also the nuns established the first ferry service here on the Brisbane water.
A ferry service?
A ferry service, yeah. Very entrepreneurial, the nuns in those days.
They should take over the Sydney ferry.
It might make them work better.
Yes, I reckon they would. Rock Davis was the second youngest son of the Davis family. He was born at sea on the 2nd of July 1833, while the family was en route to Australia.
So this is the spot that Rock Davis established his first shipyard, along with his three other brothers, also had their shipyards here once they moved on from Jonathan Piper's shipyard and training.
But how much of this area did it cover?
Well, virtually the whole, from here on down. You might notice that there's very few trees in this section from here to those pine trees down
here. Yep.
But down on this section, there's plenty of trees. So it gives you an idea that this whole area was
shipbuilding,
sectioned off and used as shipbuilding.
At 21 years of age, Rock built a 35-ton ketch, Star of the North. This was the first of 3 vessels built with his brothers, Ben and Tom, in 1854. By 1862, Rock had established his yard on the other side of Brisbane Water, at Blackwall. The schooner Centurion was built in 1863 and was the first vessel laid down at the Rock Davis Yard, Blackwall. Rock Davis had his own wharf and rail siding at Woy Woy Station. 23 vessels were built between 1893 and 1904 for the pearling industry in northern Australia, and a good many vessels were built that were not even Australian registered. With the death of Rock Davis Jr. on the 23rd of August 1913, at only 49 years of age, after half a century, one of the busiest yards in the southern hemisphere fell silent and gradually became dilapidated. The big shed collapsing in a gale in the 1920s. Another of the Davis brothers to establish a shipyard here was Thomas.
So Chris, this is where Thomas Davis set up his own shipyard here on the waterfront at Davistown after he moved on from his apprenticeship at Jonathan Piper's yard. Between 1854 and 1868, Thomas built 23 ships here before he moved his yard to Terrigal Haven.
The Pat Cam was the last commercial ship constructed by Brisbane Water Shipbuilders. She would eventually be requisitioned as an auxiliary minesweeper in World War II and was bombed by a Japanese float plane. HMAS Pat Cam was the only Australian Navy ship sunk in Australian waters while on active service by enemy action.
Yeah, so Chris, just along here was where the keel for Patricia Cam was shaped by Gordon Beatty's shipwrights. So after Gordon Beatty had selected the log for the keel, his shipwrights hoisted it ashore to this point here. Gordon Beatty stood right at that spot where we can see that bend in the waterfront here.
Yep.
It was low tide, of course. He was standing here. His shipwrights were here on the log, shaping the keel.
It was towed a few kilometres down to the Palermo shipyards, where Pat Cam was built and launched on the 30th of November 1940.
This is where Pat Cam was built. There's the mouth of a creek here, Chris. And
they built it in the creek?
Yeah, they formed a slip over the creek. It's and had a good slope on it. And the last ship that was built by Gordon Beatty at Palermo.
40-foot workboats were built here by a Balmain company during the war, but it would be 13 years before another ship would be built on Brisbane Water. When Edward Beatty built a 30-foot sloop here in 1954, this would be the last wooden ship built on Brisbane waters.
So Chris, this represents the last of 125 years of shipbuilding. This area was where 40-foot workboats were built during the Second World War, and it was actually a Balmain company that built it. You can see where the bow would fit, and there's a good slope here to launch your boat. And as far as I know, it's really the last significant archaeology of any of those shipyards over the 125-year period that remains, anywhere on the Brisbane Water. So there's the story, mate.
Oh, geez, I'd like to have been around when all those boats were being built. That would have been an amazing time.
What an incredible time, yeah.